Hello and welcome to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the podcast that may not be top of the charts, but has no problem backing interviews with people who very much were. I'm your host, Alex Greenwood, and joining me, as always, is Stu Joslin. Stu, how are you?
I am so excited about tonight. I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say. This is, with the greatest of respect to our previous interviewees, I think this is the biggest interview we've ever done. I still can't quite believe that he's come along to speak to us, but I really can't wait to get stuck into this. I think it's going to be a fantastic episode.
Yes, we are, of course, talking about Peter Lawlor of Stiltskin fame, who will be coming on shortly to talk about his time in the 90s and everything that happened to him, and, of course, his favourites from the decade, as we always do with our guests. Mm-hmm. But before that, today's episode is sponsored by Electronics Boutique. So anyone who listened to our previous episode will have heard us discussing the most 90s games console. We obviously talked about that with Dan from OddPod. Well, you can now take advantage of this exclusive offer to get savings on your new Sega, Game Gear, Dreamcast, or Sony PlayStation. Head down to your local branch and quote the code ALLRIGHT90s to get 10% off all their console and game bundles. So, for example, you can now get hold of a brand new Sega Dreamcast with a controller and Crazy Taxi included, all for $199.99, saving you £20 on the RRP. So head down there today and make the most of that offer from today's sponsor, Electronics Boutique.
What a fantastic offer. Thanks so much to Electronics Boutique for that. I have heard rumours, though, that the Southgate in Bath, which is where our nearest EB store is up for redevelopment. It's going to be torn down soon, so I'm hearing. So please do get in quickly and make advantage of that offer.
Yeah, I hope they've secured new premises for EB, because it'd be horrible to lose that particular branch.
I think it's a strong going concern. I think they'll be absolutely fine. But if you haven't already, guys, please do invest in some new bricks and mortar in the Southwest, because we want to come and take advantage of that offer for our Sega consoles.
Absolutely. I pre-ordered my PlayStation 2 from that branch and headed down there at midnight on the day in question and queued up with everyone else and went home with my brand new PS2 with Tekken Tag Tournament. So
I've never done a queue up at midnight for something. I've never done that. I remember a group of, quite a lot of people, actually, not just in my friendship group, but quite a lot of people left our Year 11 ball early because it happened to be the release of a new Harry Potter book that night as well. And they wanted to go and do the midnight queuing thing down at the Caution bookshop. So they all left about an hour early to get down there and make sure they got their copies. I think it might have been the Half-Blood Prince. I'm not too sure. But no, it's not something I've ever partaken in myself.
I've got some news for you here, Stu. Some bulletins in on the bulletin board. First off, husband of the pod, Craig, has pointed out to me that there is a sequel to Screwball Scramble, which is being released soon, or if not already been released. So
that's very exciting.
Yeah, big sequel. I mean, you can keep your Marvel films in your, I don't know, the next Grand Theft Auto, which I know is coming out soon. That's the follow-up that we really care about here on It'll Be Alright in the 90s, isn't it? A good, solid Marvel-based tabletop game.
Absolutely. I was going to say, am I getting a bit confused here? Is there a film called Screwball Scramble, or is there actually a sequel to the board game? But you've clarified that for me. So, no, that's very exciting news. Maybe we can get a sponsorship deal with them on the back of that.
Oh, that'd be good, yeah.
Yeah, we'll put Jeff onto that.
Another very small update here. Stu, I'm trying to recall, in our Films of 93 episode, I think you mentioned Remains of the Day. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, I did.
Yeah, and it was a negative memory, if I'm recall. Well, I've watched it. That's the news, really. I've watched it and I loved it. And throughout the whole thing, I was visualizing you sat there next to the TV, wishing you could watch. What was it you wanted to watch instead?
I wanted to watch Chris Barry's Motoring Wheel Nuts on VHS, which I bought for £1 earlier that day.
Yeah, the whole way through, I was thinking, this is better than that. This is better than Chris Barry, regardless of what Stu thought.
I think you have to remember that I was watching this movie with the unique viewpoint of an 8 or 9-year-old child who had a new VHS to watch. So I'm sure watching it as an adult and a fully formed and rounded movie goer and viewer, I'm sure I would probably enjoy it now, as you have. But just keep in mind the viewpoint that I had at the time. That's what I'll say in my defence. One thing from me to put on the bulletin board, if that's okay. I just wanted to thank all of the recipients of our quiz prizes for getting in touch, letting us know that they'd received them safely, and they're sending us some pictures of the prizes in their new home. So thanks for that, guys, and I really hope you enjoy them. Brother of the pod, Adam, has promised me that he will wear the South Park tie the next opportunity he gets, the next sort of high-powered business meeting that he goes to. He's going to wear that and channel my performance in the 1999 Caution Primary School Leavers play.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Please do send us a photo for another pod so we can put it on our socials. One final thing here, Stu. This is quite exciting. I've actually got the new charts, the podcast charts have been released last week. So I've got the results here in front of me, and you've not seen this, have you?
I haven't. No. This is all news to me.
Came to me. So in the Greater Wessex Nostalgia podcast charts, we're currently sitting at number 13, which I'm sure you'll know means we're 3 places higher than last year. So that's something to celebrate, I think. Mm-hmm. And then in the other chart, which is the East Central Wiltshire Entertainment (other) podcast charts. This is just to explain this. Obviously, I'm based in Bristol. You're based in Chippenham, which is northwest Wiltshire.
Yep.
But the podcast, as a limited company, is registered officially with a Pusey address. So
now, hold on a second. No. Jeff's moved us to Liechtenstein. Did you not know that?
I think that might be a shell company.
Ah, okay.
Which I probably shouldn't have mentioned on air.
Yeah.
But this is the official above board limited company.
This is where our post goes. This is where all the posts get sent, right? And the bills and everything. Okay, right.
So basically, if you go, there's a building somewhere in Pusey where if you dig around deep enough, you'll come across a post office box. Mm. That's where our official correspondence goes. But that is why we appear in the East Central Wiltshire charts because of that. Mm. But in that chart, the East Central Wiltshire Entertainment (other) podcast chart, we are currently at number 6, which is not bad, I'd say.
I don't think so, no, but I'd have to ask who's ahead of us, really.
I mean, you've got to ask yourself, haven't you?
Yeah.
I don't want to give them the oxygen of more correspondence and more airtime by saying who they are. But, I mean, well done to them. They're doing well. I'm sure they're...
You're right to do that, but I have to take a look at ourselves and say if we can't beat 5 other podcasts in the East Central Wiltshire area, then we must be doing something wrong, you know.
I think we need to increase our payola budget, don't we?
Yeah, we've spoken about this before, haven't we? Well, Catherine and Dan coming on again soon, aren't they? So we can discuss more chart payola with them at Christmas time and see if we can get some inspiration on that front. Time now for What's the Most 90s. Alex, this time, last time I chose a subject, you were kind enough to put a little echo on my voice and put a thunderclap in the edit suite just to give it a little pizzazz in the edit. If you could play the relevant national anthem after I've announced the subject, I think that would really give it something, you know. So what I want to know this week is, who is the most 90s Canadian?
Oh, Canada, our home and native land.
Good question, as always. It took me only a couple of minutes to think of this, actually. I went quite quickly past Mike Myers, and I've landed on... Now, this was someone who actually was suggested by some of our listeners for the most 90s actor. It is Jim Carrey. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read you a list of some films here that he released in the 90s. Ace Ventura, both Ace Ventura films. The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Batman Forever, The Cable Guy, Liar Liar, The Truman Show, and Man on the Moon. How is that for a list of films to be produced in the 90s by one actor?
It's a great list. We were looking for something to watch at Halloween, and the trailer for The Mask, which I've actually never seen, came up, and I watched the whole thing. I howled with laughter at the trailer. It could have been directed right at me. So that's one on the list for the next time I get some time to watch a movie. But no, absolutely, what a list. A couple of those movies, maybe a bit on the problematic side these days. I don't think the first Ace Ventura gets a lot of TV play these days. No. But you can't take anything away from Jim Carrey. So no, a great choice, I think.
Yeah, okay. That's as much as I could come up with. I think just the filmography spoke for itself, so that's who I've gone for there, Jim Carrey. What about yourself?
There was a period in the early 2000s when Bruce Almighty was my favourite movie of all time. So I'll just leave that there. I could have sworn you would have gone for Bryan Adams.
You know what? I think I got to Carrey and I stopped and I didn't think any further, and maybe I've made a mistake there because that is a great shout, actually.
So I left Bryan Adams aside because I was so certain you'd go for him.
Don't say that. Don't now.
Here's who I've gone for. Okay, let me read you his career in order and see if you can get who it is from this. Ipswich Town, with spells at Colchester on loan and Chelsea on loan. West Ham.
God, who is that?
Do you want another clue?
No, go
Well,
on.
he's already been mentioned in one of our episodes when we spoke to Rob from Premiership Years about the first season of the Premier League. He was one of only 13 foreign players to play on the opening day of the Premier League in 1992.
You're going to have to tell me.
Oh, well, it won't surprise you to hear that I've gone for a goalkeeper. I've gone for Craig Forrest as my most 90s Canadian. A
Awesome.
player, I think, synonymous with 90s English football and one of comparatively few foreign players at the time, certainly from North America, one of very, very few Canadian players. Although, of course, they did have Frank Yallop in the side as well at the time, Ipswich. So there are actually two Canadians in the team there. He featured in what was, and still is actually, but only jointly now, the record ever defeat in the Premier League for a team. 4th of March 1995, Manchester United 9, Ipswich Town 0, of course. Who could forget that amongst us 90s football aficionados?
I certainly don't want to forget it.
Of course, a Norwich fan. I'm sure you still remember that result very, very fondly indeed. Since been matched by Southampton, have lost by 9 goals twice in the Premier League, and Bournemouth have done it once since then. So at least Ipswich are now sharing that record. What people might not remember is that Ipswich actually beat United 3-2 at Portman Road earlier on in the season. So Manchester United really took some revenge on Ipswich that day for that result. He's still involved in football. He's now commentating over in Canada, but he's just a great 90s goalkeeper. I didn't really know. I knew he finished his career at West Ham. I didn't know he had a brief loan spell at Chelsea in the late 90s as well, under Gianluca Vialli. He played a handful of games on loan for Chelsea. But he's somebody I remember fondly in the pantheon of 90s goalkeepers. And so I've gone for Craig Forrest. But I have to say, I think Jim Carey probably knocks him into a cocked hat on this occasion.
It's hard to compare those two people, isn't it? They're quite different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually say Bryan Adams knocks them both into a cocked hat, but he's not been officially forwarded for this position. So, okay, I'm happy with Carey. As long as you're okay with it, I don't want to thrust him into the ledger against your will. But if you think he's deserving,
no, that's absolutely fine. Maybe we can make a case for Bryan Adams to be our honorary most 90s Canadian, but not the official most 90s. You know, like when somebody is elected the president of a society, but they don't actually do anything.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing.
He's like the trustee, yeah.
Let's make Bryan Adams an honorary trustee of this podcast. There, I've said it.
Let's do it. I'm writing it in.
I mean, we will have to run it past the board of directors, of course.
That's true. It's like VAR. You can't really celebrate anything immediately, can you? You've got to wait for a bit.
We're just going to make a quick visit to the story roulette wheel before we welcome Peter onto the podcast. Alex, because we're a bit pushed for time, I'm going to give you two options this week. They're both new on the table. I can either give you the mystery Ford Orion or the time I got trapped in a Jaguar.
I love a Ford Orion, so it's going to have to be that, the mystery Ford Orion.
This is a very simple story. Regular listeners to the pod will know that during the summer holidays, I used to go and stay with my grandparents down the road while my mum and dad were at work. So I used to obviously go and play around and about the area. And one day during the summer holidays, me and my friends came across a crashed Ford Orion in the garage blocks around the back of my nan and granddad's house. There was nobody around, but it had been deliberately crashed into the adjoining wall in between the two blocks of garages. And we were sort of having a look inside, see if we could open the doors, having a look around. And one of my nan's neighbours, whose house was closest to the crashed Ford Orion, came out and sort of warned us off it and said she'd called the police and that we shouldn't touch it. It got removed a few days later. I don't think anybody ever found out what happened, but I've always had a little thought in the back of my mind for the mystery Ford Orion from about 1996, and I can't help but wonder what happened to it or how it came to be there.
I love a mystery like that, small town mystery. Sounds like the beginning of a young adult adventure book. You and your gang of friends exploring in car, trying to find out what happens.
I was just about to say, you know, if Stranger Things had been invented by then, that surely could have been us in there.
Yeah. Like some sort of portal to another world, an underworld. If you'd just like gone through the boot or something.
Oh, what fun we've missed out on there! Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if you have any leads on that particular mystery, please do let us know. We'd love to delve deeper. It could be another car-based mystery, along with the mystery of Cape Pro. Hang on, that's not a mystery, is it? Cape Pro Katy Perry's mum or aunt stole.
I think it was her
your
aunt who
old
stole
car.
my car. Yeah.
Yeah, so
But-
that mystery, that is not a mystery. That's
But if you were a Caution resident in around 1996 and had a beige Ford Orion stolen, please do get in touch. Let us know.
joining us today is, and I've checked back through our previous episodes to confirm this, our first ever guest to have worked both as a chief economist at the German Stock Exchange and to have a #1 song in the UK singles chart. It's an absolute honour to be joined by rock and financial royalty, Peter Lawlor. Peter, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much. Very flattering introduction.
No, we're excited, and I've never seen Stu so nervous before a record before.
It's true. It's true. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Peter. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. That's a great show. Love the show.
Oh, thank you. So, yes, as listeners will be familiar with, we have a set number of questions we often ask our interviewees, and we're going to follow them through as usual now. And we're going to start, Peter, with what your life was like in 1990. We'll start at the beginning of the decade.
1990 was really tough. I'd started up the production company in, I think, 88. It got off to a reasonable start, but then the recession came, and it was, I built the studio in Primrose Hill, tiny studio, but it was hand to mouth, at best hand to mouth, and I had this enormous, gigantic bank loan, which really, God knows why they'd lent the money to somebody. I was a young kid, and they really shouldn't have lent me the money, but they did. And the interest rate was, I think, 15%. And so any money that came in went to pay interest. And it was really, really, really tough. And it did look at the end of 1990 that I wouldn't survive more than another couple of months. It got to that sort of stage. So yeah, 1990 was a tough year.
Mm-hmm. So if we move on then towards the middle of the decade, normally we would ask where you'd got to in 1995, but obviously Inside hits the top of the charts on Sunday, the 8th of May, 1994. You managed to hold off such luminaries as the Crash Test Dummies and Manchester United FC in hitting the top of the charts that day.
United knocked off the top the next week, the bastards.
Well, as they do, they knock people off the top of the table all the time, I suppose, although
Not
so much in recent years. Yeah. So you mentioned that you started the production company in 1990, so you've been working in the financial sector until then, and you hit the top of the charts in 1994 with music that had originally been composed for an advert for Levi's, and then you need to put a band together and go and create the single. So can you just give us a bit of background about how that all happened in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, well, okay, I'll do my best. Clarification, the song actually was an old song of mine. I actually wrote it at school, 77 maybe 76. It wasn't the same song, but it's the same chords. And I was in a band at school with a really talented guy called Jeff Fowkes, a good friend of mine. Bizarrely, Jeff was the son of Bill Fowkes, who played for Man United. And we did a few gigs. We were very young, in our teens. He's a singer. We did some of his songs, some of my songs, and that was the song we used to do of mine. And then the band split. The reason the band split actually was because one of our friends who's acting as a roadie was killed in a car crash, and that was kind of it. We couldn't really carry on after that for some reason. Then Jeff went to South Trafford College, which is sixth form college, sort of South Manchester, and he formed a new band called Scorched Earth. And the song in those days was called Every Time I See You. It wasn't called Inside then. And he decided he was going to do the song with his new band, which I was really pissed off about, actually. So I went to see this gig, and there were 3 bands on the bill. Jeff's band, I think, was headlining Scorched Earth. There was what seemed very dated band at the time, a hard rock band, long hair, called Fire Clown, and then there was another band who were doing their first gig. That band was called The Patrol, later to be known as the Stone Roses. And so the very first ever public performance of what became Inside was at the very first Stone Roses gig. And I remember meeting Ian, and he made a real impression on me, actually, that night. Little did I know he would become, such a cool superstar later, but it was an extraordinary thing that anyone, probably about, I guess, about 40 people there. But they got to see the first Roses gig and the very first performance of what many years later would be a number one.
That's
so
incredible.
That song came from. So long digression, sorry about that. 91, 92, it just took off. Wow, this is extraordinary. To the point where we started taking on other people. We took on Barrington Furlong. He did the Inspector Morse music. Remember that theme music?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
A guy called Robert Lockhart, brilliant classical composer. They're both dead now. And it got to the stage in 93. It was so good. We can actually move out of this. The premises was tiny. It was absolutely minute. There's a vacancy came up in the same mews in Erskine Road. And I thought we could actually make that an amazing studio. So we took the risk, built the studio. We've been working with a few people, Bartleberg, Hegarty, and a couple of directors. In August '93, by which stage we are now a couple, me and Taz. They said, you've got to come in, but signed a non-disclosure agreement. Now, that's very peculiar. It's got to be Levi's. At the time, Levi's was a really, really big deal. And they'd only used really great classic tracks. They'd never used, commission track. And so I thought, what do they want us to do? And they wanted us to have a go at it. But they also approached Massive Attack. So I thought, well, we haven't got a fucking chance. Can't compete with Massive Attack. I mean, not only are they brilliant, they're cool, and we're just nobody. They got me to write a choral piece all the way through. The bit of it at the start of the record is part of that choral piece, but it went into a kind of solo voice. We got in this amazing choir, the Ambrosian Singers. They were just unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. And then they decided they didn't want that, and they went away, and they went to Massive Attack, and they kept coming back, and they kept my dance tracks. How could we possibly compete with Massive Attack? They're one of the greatest dance bands of all time, if dance is the right phrase to use them. And I don't know, honestly don't know what made me think of this old song when I was 16. It was desperation, because it was a weekend. And I didn't want to lose this job because the advert was fantastic. The script was fantastic. It looked amazing. I thought the idea was brilliant, with the old band coming around. And it was, I thought, I'll just re-record that thing. And I just did it over a weekend and played it to them. I did a dance track, which was very second rate, which I played to them. And there was a sort of a polite, complete indifference, complete silence, Okay, I said, well, I've also got this, and I just played him this track, and the producer said, that's it. Really? I've had that for years. It's in my back pocket for years. And the thing about the track, I was probably 14 or 15 when I wrote it, but it sounds like it's a very simple guitar track. I mean, people always thought it was a grunge track. Really, I was trying to sound like Boston when I wrote it. You remember Boston, More Than the Feeling, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
Guitars. So all the Sex Pistols are one of my favourite bands. And so the similarity with grunge was a complete fucking accident. It became accidentally trendy, but it'd been around for years. And that was, so that's what happened there. Eventually got the gig, took a long time, and I thought nothing more of it. Get on with the next project. I can't remember what the next project was. Something very unglamorous like Special K. I mean, something really prosaic. And then the phone started to ring. So it went out in the, I think they broadcast it first in November 93. By this stage, we've done a lot of TV shows, we've done a lot of films, done a lot of commercials, and almost nothing gets the phone ring, especially then, because there was no internet. They couldn't, to find out who the hell we were was quite a detective job. And the phone wouldn't stop ringing. I mean, it was ringing up to about, the peak, over 100 times a day. Where do we get this music? Where do we get this music? Oh, maybe someone should do this. You know, maybe we should do a song with it. And I'd met Clive Black, who was a really good guy as head of A&R at EMI. I went to see him and he said, "No, it's forget it." I said, "Well, maybe one of your bands could do it." He said, "No. It's first of all, it's not a very good song, and you'll never get a hit off an ad." The only reason I said, "Well, Levi's had loads of hits." He said, "No, that's because there were hits already." Okay. And when at university, I'd met Jill Sinclair at ZTT, who was just amazing woman. You know, sadly dead now, but she was probably the coolest person in the music business at that time. Went to ZTT and they said, "Well, you need a band. None of our bands can do it, but you need to put a band together." Oh, okay. And at this point, Jeff Fowkes reappeared in my life. So I've not seen Jeff for years. And it turned out he's now working with Kevin Godley and Lol Cream at a company called Media Lab. He's working as a video producer, and they are top of the tree, Kevin and Lol. And Jeff said, "Oh, why don't you do something with this? I've seen it on TV." I said, "Well, I'm trying to, but nobody wants it. You know, no one's interested in it at all." And he said, "Well, why don't you put a band together?" I said, "Okay, I will." He said, "But you've got to be in the band." What do you mean I've got to be in the band? I can't be in the fucking band. I'm too busy. He said, "No one will take it seriously if you're not in the band." And that was why I was in the band. It was never my intention. But we couldn't find anyone who could sing it. And we auditioned about 40 people. And I wish we'd filmed them. And it was beyond eccentric, actually, some of the performances. There was a very, very beautiful girl who became a TV presenter, but she couldn't sing. Then there was a guy who was managing a band but wanted to be in a band. He couldn't sing either. Got a waiter from the Groucho Club who could sing but not in that style. And it went on and on and on. And meanwhile, we put an advert in Melody Maker, Singer Wanted, and it was the very last throw of the dice. I got 3 replies. One was clearly not a singer. Spanish female guitarist singer who was brilliant, but she never answered the phone. And then there was the guy who eventually got the job. And frankly, he wasn't right. It wasn't what we were looking for. Who could pretty much get it. There wasn't editing devices then were very primitive. We didn't have all the kind of, Pro Tools stuff that you've got now. It was samplers, and it was a very laborious thing. And really what we did was, it's almost line by line with that guy, Ray. But it sounded okay. It sounded okay in the end. And still trying to get a deal. Still trying to go to Warner's. Warner's almost signed it. A guy called Steve Allen liked it. Went to Epic. Epic said, "You got to get rid of that lead singer. He's terrible." Oh God, it's taken me months to find someone. And then one day I said to my then girlfriend, I said, "Why don't we just do it? Let's start a record company." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know what it means. But let's see if we can do it." And we found a distributor, 3MV, who were doing another new band at the time called Oasis. And they played me Live Forever. Oh, fucking hell, that's good. Anyway, they agreed a deal, and we're still thinking, it will be. I had to put my flat up against the cost of printing the CDs, and it was getting very expensive. I had to get a video made, which was absolutely terrible video. Guy called, actually, I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a terrible video. And if I could have afforded it, I would have scrapped it and started again, but I couldn't. Terrible, terrible. But I'm still thinking, okay, if it limps into the top 20, we might just break even here. And I'm thinking, well, why do I want to do this? And now I'm doing it because I'm doing it. Because everyone said it's impossible. Everyone said this is a shit song, won't be a hit. And I thought, right, fuck it, I'll show them. And that was really my motivation. And in the charts those days, you go to midweek, which I think came on Wednesday or Thursday. And they found and said, oh, you're number one in midweek. What? And we actually ran out of CDs because I could only afford to press 50,000. I couldn't do any more. And they sold out. So I went in at number 2 or 3. I can't remember what. And then, of course, the bank was more than happy to loan me some more money to print. So we printed a fortune, a huge number. The next week, it went to number 1. But it really wasn't expected. It was, I always say it was like we were making a homemade microlight in the back garden, and suddenly we find ourselves flying over the Atlantic. That's how it felt.
Glass hour, you turn and cower, see it turn to dust. Move on a stone dark night, we take to flight. Snowfall turns to rust, seeming to fuse in mind like a nursing rhyme. Fat man starts to fall, here in a hostile place. I hear your face start to call. And if you think that I've been losing my way, that's because I'm slightly blinded. And if you think that I don't make too much sense, that's because I'm broken-minded. Don't keep it inside.
What an amazing story. I mean, you've written a very detailed article, which you sent us a link to prior to recording, which we obviously read before the show, and it's really great. We would advise any of our listeners to go and read that at their leisure. But there's an element of this whole story which isn't really covered in the article, and I think Alex, as well as I, really want to know about Top of the Pops.
Right.
So what specific memories do you have of going on Top of the Pops? Because obviously, they're being shown on BBC4 now. Your episodes came on again very recently, 3 or 4 months ago, which put Stiltskin back in the public consciousness. What do you remember about Simon Mayo and the gang?
Well, I'm still thinking at this stage, what the hell have I done? Okay, it really wasn't meant to get this far, and it was very clear that the guys I put together couldn't cope with it at all. Again, it was much too much for them to cope with. I think in those days, the whole mental health awareness thing was not as prominent as it is now. But I'll come back to that in a second. What I remember about Top of the Pops, Top of the Pops is something you've seen in my generation from being a kid. You know, it was the absolute great big thing. But the Beatles have been on Top of the Pops, you know. I mean, so yeah, it was a really big deal. It was out in Elstree, it was filmed. What I remember 2 things about it. One is the producer was very keen for us to smash up the gear, which I thought it's very choreographed. Because I'd just been having a nice quiet life in my studio, and then suddenly they're on Top of the Pops. Oh my god! But I mean, dispassionate. It's an extraordinary thing to have done, and Top the Pops has had good bands on as well. So.
No, about smashing the stage up, I did sort of laugh to myself when I watched that performance, and I think it's yourself who kicks the Marshall cabs over, and there's clearly nothing inside them. They're just it's just a shell, because you connect with it and it just flies about 10 feet off the back of the stage.
So strong. That was the second time. I mean, it was a choreographed thing. They wanted us to smash guitars as well. This is so silly. I kicked it too hard and it hit the mic. So you watch that clip, and the bouncers hadn't been told, the security, that we're going to do it, and they rushed the stage thinking this guy's gone mad. We've got to get him off. No, it's all part of the act.
Fantastic. That's the sort of behind the scenes intel we were looking for. That's fantastic.
Okay, so in the middle of the decade, you were, of course, on top of the charts, and having all this crazy success and this wild ride that you hadn't predicted.
Yeah.
Where did the end of the decade find you? What were you up to around 99?
Well, the 90s were a fantastic time for me. Put it in context a little bit. I hadn't at all thought about taking the Stiltskin project any further than that one record. But every single record company who turned down the idea the week before were now throwing checkbooks at it. You've got to make an album. You've got to make an album. They're saying that the mental health thing. This was genuinely said to me. I'll say which label said it. It was actually Virgin London. They said this could be the new Beatles. Oh, you're out of your fucking mind. I mean, it was genuinely said. But I thought, okay, if you want to pay for an album, we'll do it. And I also knew that I didn't have the requisite contacts in the record business. And we were a 4-person company, tiny. So I took somebody on recommendation who had worked in a major and knew the business. Unfortunately, it was much more difficult to check people out in those days. And this guy's CV was a tissue of lies. And absolutely, not absolutely, but pretty much nothing was true on it. He didn't know what he was doing at all. So it was the blind leading the blind. And put out a second single. And this is it's actually a very funny story now. I didn't think it was funny at the time. As you may or may not know, the singles charts in those days was controlled by Woolworths. Did you know that?
I didn't know.
I'm not sure we did, no.
They were called EUK, that was their trading name, but they controlled the charts. And they phoned it up and said, we can guarantee you top 5 with the next single, but it's got to be full sale return. We want it free of charge first week, and anything we don't sell, you've got to pay to come back. And we talked about, well, sounds like a terrible deal, but okay, we'll do it. And then the chart came out as number 34. Oh, what happened there? That was weird. And it turned out this guy who worked for me had a row with them. And so they said, right, forget it. And I didn't know that for about 5 years afterwards. I was just mystified. And that was really interesting. I mean, I was completely new to it. Anyway, it was obvious very early on. In fact, it was obvious by the second Top of the Pops that this project couldn't last. It was having a terrible effect on 2 of the guys in the band, really bad effect. But then we had all the contractual gigs we had to do, so we went off on tour until the end of the year. But then that was it. Called it a day then, and went back to the studio. The singer joined Genesis, which was an extraordinary thing. But then the business, the films, the TV and the commercials really took off. We had our first child in 94, second child in 97. By 98, the production company was #1 in the world. We were biggest in America. You couldn't turn on television without seeing one of our things. It was impossible to do. And the Stiltskin guys, the drummer has gone on to be a very successful guy. He did the Proclaimers and Texas and loads of other stuff. And he's a really good guy. But the others weren't really professional musicians, not professional standard. In the 90s, gradually I started to assemble a house band for the studio. So it became just amazing. We're doing 11 productions a week. The 2 studios were going 24 hours. An amazing roster of composers, lots of really brilliant guys. Lab 4, the techno dance band, and they were just brilliant. So Robert Lockhart was still around then, and loads of other people. And we just had an absolute blast. I always had to pinch myself, because how can I have been so lucky? And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. What a decade. The other thing to mention is the album that I knocked off in 2 weeks was the highest selling British album that year. Again, I didn't expect that.
Indeed. I need to get hold of a copy of the album. Actually, I've heard the singles.
I must put it on Spotify.
So, with the main matters of the decade covered, let's have a chat about some of the cultural touch points. So we like to run through with our guests some of their favourites of the decade in other areas apart from their own careers. And one we like to start with is what the best car you drove in the decade was, or a family member owned, or that you owned, or so yeah. What was your favourite car of the decade?
Well, I didn't have a car at the start of the decade. I was so skint I couldn't afford one, and by the middle of the decade, I was no longer skint. And so what's amazing, if you get any kind of public profile, people give you stuff, right? And they kept lending me cars, and there were 2 which were great. It was at that time a new Land Rover Discovery. We took the kids down to Somerset for a holiday. Oh, this is fantastic! Hidden pockets everywhere, and that was. I also did the music for their commercial, actually, by coincidence. I love that car, the Discovery. And then there was another one they lent us, a Toyota. I don't know what it was, a Land Cruiser. That was it, Land Cruiser. Huge, great big thing. And one of the problems where we lived in London was one of the streets where they parked down the road. And this thing blocked the road. It wasn't right for us. But they were the 2 cars that I can talk about that I really liked. It was just great.
Well, I have the... I feel bad for even asking this question, because it's hard for everyone to answer this question. But for someone who is so connected to the music industry, had so many great experiences within it, what is your favourite album or musical act of the decade? Or we'll allow you, what did we say, Stu? Do we allow 3 now or something to?
Yeah, I think we have 3 choices. Yeah.
Well, the 90s was amazing for music. I think Nevermind, spectacular album, just spectacular. Very simple idea. Let's do early Beatles as hard rock. I mean, that's essentially what Kurt did. It's fantastic, and the production's great. I believe Andy Wallace did a lot of remix on the stuff, and I know Butch Vig is great as well. But it was just fabulous. One of those albums you could actually remember every track on one listen. Brilliant. The 2 other albums, which I mean, there were so many albums. I thought Blur were fantastic, but 2 albums that I particularly was blown away by. One was the Bends, Radiohead, and what was funny about that was they were in Abbey Road with the same team the week after we were in there, as Chris Brown and Guy Massey. I just thought that album was so great. When I heard High and Dry on the radio, I thought, God, that is such a great song. And I love the production. And they're just a fantastic band. Absolutely fantastic.
Don't leave me home. Don't leave me dry. Don't leave me home. Don't leave me dry.
And the other one I mentioned, which blew me away, was Portishead. I thought, God, that is so clever. And this filmic music, and the lyrics are great, and Beth Gibbons was fantastic. I thought those 3 albums are absolute, in my opinion, all-time classics. I mean, I could name 100, but those 3 come to mind immediately.
Well, as a top 3, that's a superb selection. Absolutely.
I was going to say it's literally impossible to argue with those 3. Just sort of icons of the decade for sure.
It was just a great time. I mean, we were in the middle of Primrose Hill, the studio. We were there until 2006, so we were there for a long, long time. We were next to Primal Scream. They were our neighbours. I got to know them very well. And Manny, who's been the Roses, was there. Good friends of his. And Darren, again, the drummer, is a very good friend of mine. I worked with Darren Mooney a lot, and wow, what a musician. Incredible. He's got it. He's special. And then around the corner from us was Creation Records. So you see Alan McGee, you see Liam and Noel every day. And then around the other corner was Mayfair Studios, where people like Brian Adams or Tina Turner would be. That street in Primrose Hill in the 90s, it was just fantastic. I never really knew anybody else. It was really friendly. It was great. Absolutely great.
It certainly trumps my time living opposite a branch of QuickFit. I'll say that. I'm not sure that you will have had much time for movie going during the decade, but if we had to ask you to pick a favourite movie or movies from the decade, what would we be looking at there?
The 2 that I mean, again, there's so many. I love Groundhog Day. Still watch it with the kids. I think that's absolutely great. And you go through that whole thing. Yeah, I wonder how much you could achieve on the same day going over. How much could you get right? I mean, it's an interesting premise. Do you remember I don't know if you've seen the film. There's a guy, the insurance salesman, keeps coming up to him. Trying to sell him insurance. That's Stevie Ray Vaughan's drummer in real life.
Oh, is it?
Is it really?
A funny little quirk.
Which I always thought was hilarious. He does it really well. And the other that I loved, and this was, with us living in Camden, working in Camden, Lock Stock I thought was fantastic. A lot of friends of mine who worked in the film industry looked down on it for some reason, but I could never get them to tell me why. And I thought it was just great. I thought Vinnie Jones was great in it. I thought it was brilliant. Pulp Fiction, which I recently watched with one of my kids. It's still great. And then the film you may not know about called Singles. You ever heard of this film?
I've not seen
No.
it.
It's set in Seattle. Bridget Fonda plays a sort of grunge fan. Matt Dillon plays a guy in a band. I think he plays the lead singer. And the guy playing the drummer in the band in Singles is Eddie Vedder. And,
wow.
And he does a great job. So that's a really nice film, actually, as well. But the top 2 are definitely Groundhog Day and Lock Stock.
I bet Stevie Ray Vaughan's drummer was really upset that he got looked over for that part in favour of Eddie Vedder.
Right, now this is a question that can go either way, depending on whether you're into this scene at all or had any interest in it. But did you ever play any video games, any computer games in the 90s? And if so, what were your highlights?
Okay, terrible confession here. I got obsessed by Super Mario Gold coins, 5 gold coins. On a
great game, absolutely brilliant on the Game Boy. Yes.
And I went on a holiday, and all I did was play this fucking game because I was determined. I got to the castle, and I couldn't get over it. It was so difficult. And then finally, I did it on the beach. Yeah, thing to celebrate. So that was I love Tetris as well. It was a very addictive game. You spend hours. All you look at the rocket. I've got the rocket. I've got the rocket. So what? But that was when my son came along. He got very into PlayStation. So that's later SSX and Grand Theft Auto. But that's the wrong decade. Of the 90s, definitely Super Mario 5. Is it 5 gold coins or 7? I can't remember.
I think it's 6 actually in the middle. But I like the idea that there's someone somewhere who swears they saw the guitarist from Stiltskin throwing the Game Boy into the sea and celebrating as if they'd won the World Cup. I'm sure it was him. Oh, excellent. We've spoken about Six Golden Coins extensively on this podcast because it's one of my favourite games from the 90s as well. So I'm thrilled that you're I'm thrilled we have that in common.
Terrible.
So we'll move on then to the small screen. We've discussed movies and we've discussed an even smaller screen with the Game Boy, but let's go to a medium-sized screen. If we're talking about TV series, what were your highlights of the decade on the TV?
Okay, I'm going to start with something I'm going to guess hasn't come up before, which is very early 90s, a thing called Chancer, Clive Owen. And I used to watch this at the time. I associate with the time when the business was really in trouble. And so there wasn't much time for relaxation, but this show came on. It was set in the city, which I had worked in. It was people I could relate to. They were the same age as me, or maybe a couple of years old, but roughly my age. And the thing that I remember most about it was the dialogue was absolutely spot on. I mean, they got the idiolects, they got the nuances exactly right. And it was, I think it's probably set in the 80s, but it was broadcast in the 90s. And I love that. I think it's still great. I'm going to guess that's the only time you're ever going to hear about that one because it's still forgotten. Sublime to Ridiculous, Beavis and Butthead. Absolutely loved it. Never featured on Beavis and Butthead, and I'm really upset about that. I'd love to piss out of me. That would have been great. This Life. Do you remember This Life?
I remember it being on.
Yes,
I never saw it. But...
You young people. It was a bunch of guys who left university and were now working in various jobs. And again, it was people my kind of age, and I used to watch it with my then girlfriend. And I like the characters, really well directed, really acted, and I thought it was great. And then the mainstream stuff, TFI Friday was fantastic. I thought it was a great show. On a Friday night, we would work in Primrose Hill in Kentish Town, we'd dash back trying to make TFI Friday. We love that. Father Ted, I'm from an Irish family, so a lot of the jokes were particular to my background. And I thought it was just fantastic. I thought it was so funny. And then finally, with My Reputation, The Fast Show. Absolutely love it. And my youngest daughter, who's at university at the moment, I got her into it. And so she's going round. Do you know The Fast Show? You seen that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It was just a series of one-liners, and they were just, everybody started to adopt them. One was with My Reputation.
My personal favourite from the Fast Show has to be Country Matters with Bob Fleming. I've got a lot of time for Bob Fleming.
Great stuff. So the next question then is a space for you to choose what you want, Peter. This is our wild card feature. So anything from 90s popular culture or any sort of culture that you were particularly fond of.
I've got a sort of flippant answer to this, and I've got a serious answer. The flippant answer is I'd like to bring back a sense of humour. I think we're in real danger of humour being outlawed at the moment, which worries me. It's either by design or by accident. I think things are being taken very literally when they're not meant to be. So satire is kind of dead. I think satire is very important for holding the powerful to account. I'm not sure satire is possible at the moment because everyone just thinks, oh, it's so offensive or whatever. So I'd like to bring back, if you look at someone like men behaving badly, imagine that being broadcast now. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. So that's my sort of semi-flippant answer. If I could bring anything back from the 90s, and this is a serious answer, I think Kurt Cobain's suicide deprived us of something really extraordinary, and I'd love to have seen where he went next. He only did 2 or 3 albums. What would he have been next? Where would he have gone with it? And I think that's a terrible tragedy, obviously, and he had a lot to deal with, and you can never judge anybody in that situation. I'm being too serious now, but I'd love to have seen where he went with that extraordinary Lennon-like talent that he had. I mean, it's a real once in every 4 generation talent he had. It was just amazing. Left everybody standing.
Yeah, that's one of life's great ponderables, I think, and obviously can be applied to any musician who we lost in their prime. But Kurt in particular, I totally agree.
The other one from, Hendrix. I'd love to have seen what Hendrix did next. He was only 27. Yeah, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. At least with John Lennon, be gone until he was 40, and even that seems ludicrously young.
Well, I mean, he released a new song last week, so well, you might be pleased to hear we're on the home straight now with the questions. So we got a couple of questions that we like to finish on. So the first of those is, how did the 1990s shape the person that you are today?
How serious can I be? My wife said, "Don't be serious, you'll bore them." Hugely. The thing about Whitewater Records, I learned more from that. It was a 2-year experience. I learned more from that than from anything else. And as you know, I'm now an economist, and the essence of economics is trying to analyze and predict behavior. The thing about the music business, especially then, it is like a magnifying glass to human behavior. You see the best and the worst of people, mainly the worst, in very close up. And the irrational behaviors and the irrational behaviors. But it was incredibly important for me to learn how people can behave. Very, very, very valuable. And also running that, at one stage we had the 3rd highest turnover of any label in the UK. And by this stage we got less than 14 people in the office. Tiny company. And it was like being in a hurricane. What a learning experience! You learn from failure. I think failure is the best teacher, really. Mm-hmm. And I do regard that experience as really a failure. I think it failed. I'm not sure it could have worked, but it was a huge learning experience. You also learn a lot about yourself. First, 2 children came along. Got married in the 90s. The 90s are my decade completely. I say the Stiltskin experience, apart from what I learned from it, has had no impact on my life at all. I mean, no one ever goes, "Oh, when you back from Stiltskin," because they never heard of it. Never heard of it. I had lunch with. We got rid of the original bass player. We got a new bass player, a guy called Aubrey Nunn, who was a much better musician and a much more grounded guy. He joined Faithless on the back of it, and he said that his time in Stiltskin had paved the way for the rest of his life, which I thought was really interesting, because that isn't my experience at all, in terms of it didn't lead to anything, but the learning experience, especially the learning of things I got wrong, which is, by the way, most things, was really, really useful.
So the final question then really is a kind of AOB, really, a wild card, as it were. Is there anything else from the decade that stands out? I think you've picked the thing you'd like to bring back. So is there anything from the decade that you wouldn't necessarily like to bring back, but you really enjoyed?
Well, the thing I mentioned earlier, the camaraderie in Regent's Park Road and Primrose Hill, it was really quite amazing, because everybody knew everybody else. Everybody was in a band. We all knew everybody in every shop. Everyone in every shop was actually really cool. A lot of socializing going on. There was this fantastic, there still is, the restaurant in Primrose Hill called Lamonia. They'd been in the street for years, but they moved in 1992 to the current premises. And you go in there and it'd be full of, Ben Elton or Liam and Noel. It was I've forgotten his name. The drummer in Blur, what's his name? Dave Rowntree.
Dave Rowntree.
He was always around. Really nice people, and it was a very fortunate time to be there. We used to have my wife, this kind of idea, we should move back there one day. But the fantasy is you move back and you're you're back to 29 or 30, living in that street with everyone still there. And of course, it's long gone now. It's extraordinarily expensive. When I bought my place, my 1-bedroom flat there, it was 50 grand, and which is a huge amount of money for me. But now you're looking at £1 million. So it's a completely different sort of demographic now. Then it was completely full of. Chrissy Hine lived down the road, and Charlene from Texas lived around. Robert Plant, used to see Robert Plant all the time. He lived in Chalcot Square. So yeah, it was great, and that's something I like to bring that back. But I'd like to be that age with everyone there still. If that's not a terrible answer.
Well, just before we bring things to a close, you've referenced that you've returned to economics now as a full-time profession, but you speak to us from a lavishly appointed home studio. So you're still making music, you're still in the business, and you're still making music.
I am still making music. The reason I went into music was because I kind of had to do music, and then I found I could earn a living at it, which, in all seriousness, is an extraordinarily fortunate thing, because it's very, very difficult to make. I mean, it's really difficult now. But yeah, I'm writing quite a lot at the moment. I'm still playing. I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm enjoying it because it is most of my career. It was writing for a purpose, either for a release or for a movie or for TV or whatever. And there was always a deadline. And so it's an interesting discipline to kind of have no deadline and not get lost in the details, which I can do. It's very easy for me to do that. But yeah, I'm doing a lot at the moment.
Right.
Excellent.
Is there anything you want to tell the listeners? Any social media channels or anything you want to get out there?
Well, I will put out the Stiltskin material. One of the things that's I've got to find a way around is the singer is still touring as Stiltskin, and he's put out some albums, I think. And I don't really want it to be with that stuff, so I'm going to have to find some way of separating it. When will this be put out?
2 weeks today.
It should be 2 weeks today, yeah.
Right, I'll try and get the album out then. I'll try and get the album out, The Mind's Eye. It was interesting. I listened to it the first time in over 25 years recently, and the stuff I don't like on it and the stuff I think's great. And it's very interesting to hear your own work from the past, because you can hear it without being involved emotionally after such a big thing.
Well, Peter, it's been amazing. It's been emotional. I cannot thank you enough for.
I hope you can make something of it. I witted on there. So
there's a difference between, the bloke down the pub wittering on and Peter Lawlor wittering on about that decade. It's been an absolute privilege, and me and Stu have really enjoyed it. I know I can speak for you there, Stu.
Absolutely, yeah. I've been absolutely enthralled. Thank you so much for spending the time to speak to us, Peter. We really appreciate it. And
it's a great time, and I wrote that article because when I went to the German Stock Exchange, there are two kinds of people in my life. There are people who will say, "Oh, so you're a musician as well," and there are other people who go, "You're an economist." Well, right, I'm going to give the whole fucking story, and because it became a conversation I had to have a lot. Well, okay, well, let's explain what happened, and as best I can. That's why I wrote that article.
Yeah, it's great. We definitely recommend it. We'll put a link to it in the episode description, so everyone knows where to find it. Yeah, it's a great read.
Thanks so much. All right, speak soon. Thanks a lot, Peter. Take care.
Well, Stu, how about that? Top of the charts, Peter Lawlor. That was quite some journey back down memory lane there, wasn't it?
What an absolute pleasure it's been to talk to the man for the last hour and a bit. You will have seen me just enraptured by the stories he was telling and the places he's been and the things he's done. One thing I wasn't expecting was the story about Super Mario Land 2's 6 golden coins, which is something that I really very much appreciate, as you can expect. And it's the power of the pod in action, because, you know, we might have achieved something here for the music fan at large.
Exactly, yeah. There's a great possibility that the Stiltskin album may be available on Spotify thanks to this pod.
This tin pot operation has got a classic 90s rock album onto Spotify.
Finally, our cachet has reached a point where we have some sway over the music industry. It's about bloody time.
I think maybe we should just shut up shop now. I think it might be job done.
I think you might be right, actually. Let's just cut it there.
No, Peter is an absolute top man, and we can't thank him enough for coming on.
If you want to get in touch with us on the pod, we of course welcome that, as we always do. You can find us on Twitter at allright90s. And we're on Instagram, allright.90s.podcast. All of those links will be below, along with our Facebook and our email. It's all in our LinkedIn. And we'd love to hear from you, so please do get in touch. But Stu, we don't think we know what we're going to do next week, do we? Not after that. We're sort of...
I think I might need to go and lie down in a darkened room for a couple of days to recover.
Yeah, maybe there just won't be an episode next week. It'll just be silence, an hour and 5 of silence.
We have embryonic plans for our Christmas episode, but we're not entirely sure what's coming up in mid-December. Of course, as soon as we know, we will pass that message on. But we will be here. Please don't worry about that.
Well, that just about wraps us up, doesn't it, Stu? So until next time, I'm just off to kick over my guitar amp on the way out.
And I'm just off to park a Toyota Land Cruiser at the end of the road.
Goodbye.
Bye all.
And if you think that I've been losing my way, that's because I'm slightly blinded. And if you think that I don't